So in terms of, you know, how you choose a putter and how we fit a putter, and even to a certain extension, if putting coaches are trying to improve someone's technique, it's a little bit of a different philosophy than if we were doing, like, say, a driver fit, right? So if I compared the two, if I had, you know, one of our tour staff come in and they wanted to hit some drivers, and we went out and did that, kind of figured that out, and came back in here and we wanted to look at putting, I almost have to put on a different, like a different hat. I have to have a little bit of a different mindset. The philosophy is generally a little bit different. And the constraints that you use, the measurements, the kind of way you go about trying to analyze the information is a little bit different. If you're looking at like a driver fitting, it's essentially a math equation. And by that I mean there's a pretty specific, easily identifiable goal when you're fitting something like a driver, right? And you're a little bit of a slave to the physics you're dealing with when you're hitting a driver. So if someone comes in, I have to immediately discern the difference between what I'm capable of doing by changing the specs of the golf club versus what someone would have to do in terms of changing their technique, okay? A simple example would be, I mean, we're not gonna see this with a pro, but a simple example would be if someone came in and I said, okay, what kind of, you know, kind of pick their brain a little bit, what have you used in the past, tell me about your game, typically what flight do you like to look for with a driver? And the guy said, well, I typically want to set my stock shot right center, maybe a little draw, not too much hook, a little bit anti-hook, but I want to be able to turn over a little bit. I'd like my miss to be kind of hanging down the right side, maybe a little bit of a push. But generally a little bit of a push draw. And then he would say, and this is kind of the trajectory window I'm looking for, because that, even though there's kind of an optimum, there's a little bit of a variance there in terms of what guys like to see in terms of the launch window. And if he makes a few swings and I see he's cutting across and hit down and catching on the heel,
there's nothing you can do there.
Yeah, so the physics of impact is going to determine that ball wants to start left and cut. He's going to lose ball speed. He's going to have a pretty high backspin rate. So there's only so much I can do with the club. I can do a little bit with the club, but I can't necessarily change the entire characterization or general nature of his flight. Like starting right with high ball speed, like a center hit, efficient hit, a good ratio, starting right center with a draw, you can't do it.
The impact conditions don't.
Yeah, so you kind of know that, right? It's like there's no mystery to that, right? There's like, okay, these are the things, and then I can tell the person if he's a decent player, it's like you got to change a couple things if you want the flight you're saying. Otherwise, this is the flight we're going to be able to produce. And from there, within those constraints, I can then kind of tweak it around a little bit to try to make it a little bit better. But at least it's pretty clear. It's not necessarily an easy thing to change or fix, but it's not mysterious, right? It's not like, gosh, I have no idea what the answer is for you. We know what the answer is because we can see it right up there on the screen. Again, it comes down to a little bit of a math equation. And the other thing about drivers, and this is even more true than irons, is that there's an easily identifiable goal. Like we know what optimal launch parameters are, so you know what you're trying to do. Irons will change a little bit because I may get a pro that comes in and goes, yeah, I know that the PGA Tour average is 16 with a 7-iron at 7,200 RPMs. But I don't like to fly it that way. I like to fly it a little bit flatter than that, or I like to hit a whip in the air. That's just the way I play golf. So that can vary a little bit because that's a little bit more up for debate in terms of how a guy's going to get himself around the golf course. But for the the pros are kind of doing what amateurs are trying to do with the driver. They're pretty much trying to bomb it down there as far as they can. And there's a pretty easily identifiable launch window for a ball speed to make it go max distance in certain conditions, right? You kind of know what you're trying to achieve. So if we do that, then come in here and do putting. And let's say the guy says to me, you know, I'm putting so poorly that I want to kind of reset, start from scratch. This is kind of what I've used in the past, but let's forget about that. I don't want to even tell you really much about what I've done before. I just want you to treat me like, you know, like a blank sheet of paper. And I want you to just like put me on the machine and look at my numbers and stuff and just tell me what I fit for. And I'll go, okay, I can do that. And don't pick his brain as far as what he likes the looks of, feel, living like that. Just kind of put him on the machine and go, okay, based on the parameters we're seeing, dynamic lofting, hosel configuration, face rotation, et cetera, et cetera. And then I can say, okay, there it is, there's your putter. And you go, no, I can't play with that, right? That's gonna happen with putters, right? Because they sit there and go, well, that doesn't sit right. It looks like it sits open, and when I hit it, it feels a little bit damped in impact, I get good feedback, right? So there's all these subjective things. They're not necessarily performance related, but they will make a difference on the golf course, right? So if I give someone a putter that's technically a good fit on paper, but they don't like the way it looks or feels or the way it sits, the visuals, whatever it is, the balance of the putter, if they go out and have one bad putting day, with it, it's going in the trunk of the car. It's done, right? Because like I knew that wasn't right for me. Because you're subjective to what you're kind of a slave to, and those things are not readily identifiable like it is looking for driver's ball speed 160, 12, 2400. We don't have those as much with putting. Is there a launch window in terms of the launch and spin of a putter? Sure. But is there something that's going to tell me what each person individually likes to have, what the individual characteristics of the putter needs to be for that particular person? No. So what I like to do is try to figure out what is someone likely to be able to play golf with first, and then kind of fine tune the specs from there, right? So someone will come in and go, I don't know what I fit for, but I like mallets. I've always used mallets. That's where I want to stay. I want you to fit me for a mallet. Okay, good. That's an important piece of information. Because he might technically, on paper, fit into a blade better. But if he says, I can't stand blades, I've never done well with them, I don't like them, I don't like the way they look, I feel like they're less forgiving, my alignment characteristics aren't as good with blades. So that's an important piece of information that has a huge impact on how they feel sitting up the ball. Because ultimately with the putter, sure, you want it to fit technically, but you also want someone to stand over a putter and feel like, okay, this putter feels like an extension of me. It feels like it's really my own. I really like the way it looks, feels, the way it sounds when the ball comes off the face. When I hit it, I can tell exactly if I hit the putt too hard. Those are some individual subjective characteristics that are more difficult to define without, a little bit of iteration and trying to figure it out. So with you guys, it's kind of like, what do you think you like first? And then let's take a couple measurements and see if that's a viable option for you, if we need to tweak it from there. Okay, so that's kind of the way I would approach it. That's the way I'm going to approach it with all the pros as well. As far as the actual measurements themselves, there's two different systems here. Sometimes you use SAM. SAM's been around a long time. I don't use SAM as often. I have it in here just in case I use it, but most of the pros when they come in here are going to want to look at Quintic data. There's certain strengths and weaknesses to each system, but most of the time if you're fitting a putter and you're just trying to determine how the ball's coming off the face for an individual player, the Quintic gives you a little more accurate information in the sense that it can actually see the ball, right? It's a ball launch monitor.
So Quintic is more ball and Sam felt more shaft club face.
Yeah, so the SAM, the SAM, I'm going to clamp that triplet on the shaft. And because it's ultrasound, like it's using high frequency sound waves, and so it's very good at getting like the 3D dynamics of your stroke. If you're giving someone a putting lesson, like if someone comes in, I want you to see if my stroke mechanics are any good. And they're not really even talking about the putter per se. There's like, how am I, like, compared to your pros you see, basically for a putting lesson, right? Yeah. It's outstanding. It's in the dynamics of the putter. Now, it will predict what the ball's doing, but it's got to do some math, right? It's got to sit there and go, well, the assumption is you got this much loft on the putter, you got this shaft lane impact, you got this angle of attack. So it does some math calculations and predicts what the ball is doing. Now, it's pretty good at predicting, but if it says, well, you've got either some topspin or you've got a lot of topspin, that's what it'll say. Whereas the Quintic will say, no, you've got 43 RPMs of topspin, exactly, and you've got 4 RPMs of rifle spin, and because it's looking at the ball. So if you really want to know what the ball's doing, the Quintic's the way to go. Now, if you looked at the weakness of the Quintic, if someone said, I want to see the dynamics of what my stroke's doing, the issue with something like the Quintic is it's a single camera system. So here's the camera down here looking that way. And if we have one camera, you're essentially looking at things in 2D, right? So a camera looking this way can see this axis really well, can see this axis really well. It cannot see this axis as well. Because it's almost like if you're trying to tell how far something away, you covered one eye, right? It's depth perception. That's why anytime we do like these high-speed 3D measurements of the driver measurements, when we're doing testing, we're going to use 2 cameras, right? Because 2 cameras are going to tell me X, Y, and Z. It's going to tell me every single axis. So this one here is going to tell me, it's going to, I mean, it can measure this, but again, that's where the weak spot of the Quintic is. I'm going to put dots on the putter head, and then I have to measure the distance from the dots. I have to pipe that in, and then it helps the camera when it knows where those dots are to go, okay, now it's moving toward the camera and away from the camera, and then it's going to try to kind of figure that out, but it's not nearly as effective as just watching the spin go across this axis, right? So if someone says, so if the Quintic says, well, you're 2.5 degrees from the inside of your path angle of the putter, well, the SAM's going to nail that perfectly, right? Because it sees everything in 3D. The Quintic, I would not bet my life that it's 2.3. It might be 2.8, right? Because it's a 2D camera system and it's got parallax that it's dealing with there. So again, for our purposes, it's not a big deal. I'm not really giving you guys putter lessons as much as I'm trying to just see if the putter sets up well for you guys and works well. So we'll turn on Quintic and kind of see how you do. So that's kind of the general putter spiel, how it's a little bit different than some of the other stuff. Sure. You guys have any questions? Does that all make sense?
Let's do it.